All right, we should be live, I think. Something didn't go wrong. Mostly, probably. Let's see if it loads, please. All right, we should be live, I think. Okay, looks like it's working. All right. Similar routine. You know, shit. Yes, shit science. I think we'll change this setting back to the regular size window. Yes, leave more room for me. Sorry about the probably a little bit of background noise. I could probably turn that off, but you know, I don't know. That's probably better. Yes, it is. I'm fairly certain of it. Oh, no, chair is not better. All right, sorry. Technical difficulties. Shit happens. All right. So this is another Michael Van Briesen video, and it was really disappointing. I like the guy, but I really hate this video. But anyway, and very nice. I got a new smoking device from a viewer, Elvis, from the Inmendum channel. Um, but it's a piece of shit. No, I mean, it's nice, but it's a piece of shit. It's really, it's nice, but it's like everything. They've over engineered everything, and it's like stupid stuff. It well, first it has one of these doors for the batteries. That's one of those retarded push and slide things, and they're never work. Always a piece of shit. And it's like that should be against the law to even make them because they always break. Um, but it's very nice when it works. But it does this stupid thing where it tells me it knows better than me and that I can't use the device because it says there's too many ohms or there's too few ohms or it's just, and it's lying. And maybe it's stupid. It's really a dumb machine, but it thinks it's smart. Just like kind of physics. It thinks it knows what it's talking about, but it doesn't. It's just completely full of shit. I can just unscrew the thing and point it right to it and say, look, it's not shorted, you idiots. See, I can plug it in over here and it works. See, no shorts. There's not too few ohms. The whole idea of saying too high ohms, right? Like the idea that somehow there's too much resistance and how could that ever hurt? Can't possibly blow up. So why don't you just try anyway? You're just sitting there looking at it and say, why don't you try anyway? Why, why is this a problem for you, you fucker? Anyway. So, I've got a workaround where I have the thing half screwed in, which, I shouldn't have to do. And I'm using my old tank because it's just a much better tank. It's the one that, leaks and is a piece of shit. And it doesn't smoke well. But anyway, and they make these things for kids, who are just doing flavors or something. Because if you put real nicotine juice in this thing, it'll burn you. I mean, it's just too much. Just to get this is all you need. That's it. That's smoking. Okay, it's not vaping, it's smoking. That's all I want. Well, anyway, but it's very nice, but it's called Alien something. It has two names. Smoke, SMOK, Alien. But anyway, very nice. I mean, nice little piece of technology, all that kind of crap, but stupid. I wouldn't buy one. If I were you, I wouldn't. I can't recommend it because it's a piece of shit. I mean, it tells you, it's giving you error codes that are completely useless. Not only wrong, but just useless. Even if they were right, they just serve no purpose. You're a battery. I'm not asking you to analyze anything. I just want you to put electricity into the fucking goddamn thing. That's all. I hit the button. That means you put electricity into it. It shouldn't be any more complicated than that. Like the voltage I want too. See, that's the thing. You can adjust the wattage, not the voltage. But you're always adjusting the voltage. So instead of just saying, well, here you can adjust the voltage, they play this wattage game. When no, it's just voltage. Just let me tell you how many volts to pump into it, and then the watts will take care of themselves, fuckheads. Anyway, it's really badly engineered. And then even the software, you have to have software in it. It's a battery, and they put software in it. And it's retarded, though. To get to the menu, you click 3 times, and then to choose something, you click a little longer than, like, not a quick click, but not a long click. It's stupid. I hate it. Anyway, I really appreciate it. I mean, it's very nice. New things are nice, but this is an example of new sucks, because it sucks. Just in the number of hours it took for me to do that. I mean, literally hours of screwing these things on, screwing them off. Why the fuck's it doing that? And I had to go look online. I find out, oh yeah, they chronically can't tell the difference. They're chronically retarded, and they're always chronically retarded in a bias against using your own. It seems they don't read other tanks chronically. They read them chronically badly, which is just part of the racket where you're saying I'm getting gamed by these fuckers. There's nothing wrong with my tank. They just don't want me using it. That kind of bullshit. They want to sell more of their 100%. No, they're 100 times more expensive. Well, 10 times more expensive, atomizers. That's all. They want to force me to waste money on their burned out coils instead of my own burned out coils. They don't like me to have the choice. Clearly, I think that's their agenda. So anyway, I happen to also have cigarettes, which is excellent. I'm really in nicotine bliss. So anyway, I have wasted way too much of your time. Sorry about that. Let's get on to the business of being depressed about how pathetic physics is. And this is pathetic, in my opinion. It's just fucking pathetic. Pathetic.
Welcome to ElectroOnline. So here we had the entire scientific community doubting that Einstein was correct.
So that's back in 18, let's say. People were like, this is really confusing. What do you mean? The time is dilated and the things don't do it. So I don't know exactly why. So maybe somebody can fill me in. Why photons need to be moved by gravity. I don't know exactly why that's essential to general relativity. I think that's right. Why it's at all interesting. Why it's a subject Einstein even played with. Why does he need to move photons with gravity? Why is it essential to relativity? Why did he need to make photons exempt from the inverse square law? So, gravity, clearly, a lot of people, electric universe people, all kinds of people have already kind of sort of figured out that, well, no, gravity can't be this bent space thing. It's got to be something that's happening, with the other stuff moving the speed of light, the light and the magnetism. Somehow that kind of thing is got to be manipulating the universe, creating gravity. So whatever the waves are that, make light and make magnetism, something like that must be doing gravity. And you would obviously say, well, if that's by the inverse square law, those things usually have a materialness to them. I mean, whether it's an ether or not, there's kind of a little bit of something. Something has to create the gravity. And so you would argue that the inverse square law is a byproduct of what the sun is doing, not what the visitor's doing. The visitor doesn't get to change the rule. The rule is the gravity is being produced by the sun in some way, and its production of it can't be varied. You can't say, I'm a photon, I'm exempt. I don't do that. I don't get hit by as much light. So I can't be in the same amount of space and somehow avoid getting hit by the light. There's no way to be invisible to it. And the same thing with the gravity. You can't just be half invisible. Like, I'm not invisible to all the gravity, just half of it. And that's what Einstein did in his equation. He basically said electrons aren't exempt, photons are exempt. So an electron gets hit by half as much gravity as a photon traveling the same space. And the argument is because the photon's going the speed of light, it's time dilated and thinks it's in the space twice as long. Well, the photon thinking it was in the space twice as long clearly can't be what actually took place. I mean, there is, even those relativist people understand that something actually physically had to happen. Like even the light clock example where the light moves, it has to either move or not move. And the two worlds will be very different. So the world where it doesn't move, the light's not going to hit the mirror. And the world where it does move, it will, and it will go the longer distance. But one of those two things had to happen, not both of them. And so you've got to argue. What do you mean? The photon, we know how long it's exposed to the gravity. We know that the right answer is the photon's in this gravity for a second, because the photon thinks time is moving slower. Doesn't mean time is moving. The time didn't happen. It shouldn't happen in the frame thing. So there's no way of changing it. And the fact no one really fixes that problem with like an explanation for how the photon could be exempt or why you would make it exempt. So the thing I don't understand is why was it essential to Einstein's theory to start playing with the idea of giving photons exemption to gravity? At the same time, you're conceding they're affected by it. So he's giving photons enough materialism to be affected by gravity, but somehow saying they're only half affected because they think, right? They're twice as affected because they think they were in the gravity twice as long. So it's like me going to the beach and having a broken clock that runs twice as slow, and me saying, look, it says on my clock I was in the sun 2 minutes. When we all know I wasn't in the sun for 2 minutes. I was in the sun for 1 minute, and my clock is just counting a little poorly. Anyway, so that's the premise of this. So when his theory was first proposed, nobody really could understand it or grapple with the math, and so everybody was a little skeptical because they had no evidence that the world is that wacky, no hard evidence. And so it was easy to just say, prove it or show me, and so the argument is that somehow the world got shown. And clearly the evidence says that evidence sucks.
When he said that light was affected by gravity, but he gave them a challenge. In 1919, there was going to be a total solar eclipse off the coast of South America. And what he told them, he says, go.
All right. So the first thing he said there, light is affected by gravity. That's only part of what Einstein said, right? Einstein said not only is it affected by gravity, it's affected twice as much by gravity. So instead of 10 meters per second, if light's going across the face of the Earth, it's feeling 20 meters per second. Somehow the gravity is twice as much gravity. So there's two parts to that. Two parts to Einstein's fiddling. Einstein's fiddling. Violin player.
Go ahead, 6 months prior to that solar eclipse, go ahead and take pictures of the night sky.
So Einstein didn't say this. So as I understand the history, it was entirely Eddington's idea. So Einstein never said this. So he said Einstein proposed. Einstein never proposed an experiment. Einstein never said, go do this and prove me right. Never happened that way. Eddington tried to think of a way to prove Einstein right. And it was Eddington who came up with this whole crap. The guy who did the experiment. So, another bit of prejudice, of course. But I'm just saying, it wasn't like Einstein challenged the world with an experiment, said, do the experiment. He didn't do that. Einstein basically said, you're probably not going to be able to see lensing. That was Einstein's perception. You're not going to be able to observe it.
And see where the stars are located relative to where the Earth is 6 months before.
See, Eddington was a professional weights and measures guy. His job was in the field of measurement. So he was sort of an anal measuring kind of guy, well, homosexual anal, But anyway, nothing's not saying anything against it. I just mean it was just kind of a funny play on words that I said that, and then I thought about it in the moment. I said, "Oh, he was a homosexual. He shouldn't talk about him being anal because Anyway, just funny to me. Anyway, I mean, if I was watching, I would have laughed at that because that's kind of funny. But anyway, but it's not funny because homosexuality is funny. I'm just saying, certainly gay people are funny. I just mean, they're not funny in a bad way. I just mean they're funny. Anyway. Yeah, let's continue. Because I have no idea where I was.
Now, of course, in 6 months, the Earth will travel.
Okay, so the idea was the simple experiment is you're going to take very nice pictures, very high resolution glass plate, very good quality photos of the sky at 2 times, looking in the same direction, the same place, 6 months difference. So the only difference is what's the only difference? The position of the Earth relative to the sun is different. So there is some difference, which is not perfect, but you can't get around the difference because you got to get the sun out of the way. The sun can't be in front of you. The sun has to be behind you. So you have to have that difference. So the difference of the width of the orbit of the Earth, which is a substantial difference, is going to be the only difference technically in your photograph. So you're photographing something and your position is changing in the sense that you're closer and then you're much further away, but you're looking exactly at the same thing.
Around the sun to the other side. And then if the moon happens to come in between the sun and the Earth, the shadow of the moon will cast, or the moon will cast a shadow on the Earth, and there'll be a location where potentially there'll be a total solar eclipse. And sure enough, in 1919, there was one of those.
Right. So the idea is you take the picture without the moon, okay, on the other side, without the sun either, with nothing in your way, and then you take a picture with with both of them in the picture, so to speak. The moon blocking the sun.
Solar eclipses. That's when for a few minutes the sky would almost become completely dark. The sun could not be seen except for the light, the corona around the sun.
Which is humongous. So that's a huge factor in all of this, is that you have a huge amount of particles, electrons, all kinds of excited bits that emanate from the sun in a very large, so the sun is this big, the corona is like this, and you could speculate that well beyond where you still see the corona is still there. So we even in the perfect eclipse circumstance, the moon's not really big enough to block out the corona of the sun, which would be more ideal.
And some of the brightest stars would then show up and could be photographed. Now, the difference between 6 months earlier is that this time the light of the stars would have to pass by the sun. And as he predicted, he said that because of the gravitational attraction of the sun, the light would change direction. Right.
Now, Newton says that line would be half as much deflection. So Newton's, even if Newton accepted that gravity bends light, by the inverse square law, by the same laws affecting all the other material bodies that are bent by gravity, including the Earth and its orbit, light is cheating. So light has the advantage, okay, so to speak, of somehow it is affected by gravity much, much more, twice as affected. So this experiment done by by the rules where all the material objects are affected by gravity the same way. By that rule, it can't be done. There's no possibility of seeing the difference. This difference is going to be so slight, you won't be able to get past the Brownian motion problem. The everything's moving a little bit, and you'll lose the ability to see this tiny, tiny, tiny difference in the angle of the light. So it's a theoretically impossible experiment without Einstein's change to the rules of gravity to make this exception for photons. So you have to really understand that this is more than just a UFO theory. This is a talking, this is a close encounter of the third kind. This isn't just seeing some cigar in the sky. This is a real story of extraterrestrial conversation.
Like this, of course, not quite as much as I've shown you here, but
yes, of course, only the tiniest of difference.
You can see, at least from the image, that would be the case. And because of that, when you take a photograph, the sun would the stars would no longer appear.
Right. So let's understand that Eddington's own journal points out that he had the hope of capturing 10,000 stars on his plate. And the weather conditions were so bad that he only got 1,000. So it was a 10 times degrade in his expectations, his ideal of doing this experiment. So 10 times less resolution than he was hoping for to do an experiment that's incredibly difficult. Even if he had perfect plates, it's still an incredibly small amount of difference to detect, and he has very imperfect plates.
At that location, the stars would now appear at a different location. And Einstein actually told them what this...
So he says Einstein told them, but no, Einstein just said the real number should be 0.75 arc seconds for everything else in the universe. So any other moving object, the amount of deflection you would expect it's supposed to be, I think, 1 radius from the sun. So we're talking about 1 radius from the sun, I think. Not on the surface of the sun, but 1 radius away. The number should be 0.75 arc seconds. Now that would be true for the Earth or any body, any other material body, given a proportional velocity and all that kind of crap. That would be the expectation. And instead, Einstein just doubled the number to 1.25 or 27.
Angle difference would be. And it turns out this angle difference is about 1.75 arc seconds. Now, that's not a big angle. That's a tiny angle, but it's...
Yes, it's 0.003 degrees or something. I mean, it's a 1,000th of a degree. Very small change.
It's measurable. And so they went ahead.
So he says it's measurable, but that's where this is all like a little bit funky, right? So understand, the glass plates have to be made in a time exposure, something like 5 minutes. Okay, because you only got like 4 pictures in the 20 minutes of total eclipse. And again, the 20 minutes isn't a full total eclipse, right? It's the moon's still moving, the sun's moving. It's not it's lopsided. The corona leaks more on one side than the other side. So you're talking about a time exposure, which means the little stars he's taking a photograph of are going to be lines. They're not going to be stars. They're not going to be little points. They're going to be lines in the field. So little blurry lines. And he has to figure out in that blurry line what the real center is. And then compare that to the picture. He can't take a 6-minute time exposure without the sun because it's going to be so much brighter that the same star he's looking at is going to be way too bright. And so then you'll get too much light. So he has to take a much shorter time exposure to get the image without the eclipse. So without eclipse, the control image isn't going to be a 6-minute time exposure. It's going to be a much shorter time exposure. And so your line is going to be a different kind of little line. And this is, this is a little bit of a problem, not including the point that the entire Earth's diameter of its orbit in a different position looking at the star. I mean, 16 minutes or more at the speed of light distance difference. I mean, not an unsubstantial amount of distance.
Took some photographs 6 months earlier. They took a ship down to the coast of South America. They experienced a total solar eclipse.
So he didn't include that rained the whole time they were there, ruined half of their photographic material before they even started. And it was still crappy weather. Even though they got some pictures, it was still pretty crappy weather. No perfect blue sky like when it happened in 2018, right? 2007, no, 2018, 17, when you had this perfect eclipse, blue sky. Nobody did the experiment. Nobody took any time exposures. Nobody did this classic experiment that proves Einstein right, that's never been duplicated successfully. That doesn't surprise anybody. 100th anniversary of Einstein. I mean, 100th anniversary of the experiment, and nobody conducted the experiment. Really, this makes sense to you people.
They measured, or they took photographs of the stars and measured the position of the stars, and sure enough, the vistas, or the difference in the angles predicted by Einstein, ended up being so. He proved that, yes, indeed.
So Einstein never proved it. Eddington did the experiment, and some other guy, the collaborative thing. They didn't agree on the initial interpretation of the plates, and only after negotiations did they agree that, oh yes, we've done it. So hardly a pristine experiment. Eddington's own words were, I wouldn't stake my life on the results. Well, his own words in his journal. And we're talking about a proof. And that isn't how propaganda is done. This isn't just propaganda. This is quality science. The science that says you're supposed to repeat experiments and do all that kind of shit. Fuck that. It seems like what they're saying. Fuck that. We don't need to do that. We don't need to repeat smeepeat.
Light will bend around an object like the sun in a predictable manner, and that could be measured, and therefore he proved that light is indeed affected by gravity.
Right. So that somehow proves all this relativity shit. So that's the irony of it, right? Because the New York Times headline doesn't say Einstein right about one specific thing. It says Einstein right, period. Like general relativity is right. Like his whole theory is now right because he predicted something that, number one, hasn't been proven, and number two is only in the most tangential way, I would imagine, connected at all to relativity. I mean, I'm a little bit informed on this subject, at least, and I don't really understand exactly why it's important to relativity to move photons with gravity. I mean, why is that at all necessary? All right, so we can block somebody, because that's always fun. Have you done drugs? Have you sucked cow dick? Oh, seriously, have you? I mean, you seem like the type, Peter. Yeah, you seem like the type that sucks cow dick. I don't want to put him in a timeout. How come I have to change this? So annoying. No, kill him. I wish they would just have the kill him. A hammer smashing things. Oh, just amazing. All right, so no answers to my questions by any of the whatever, if there are any in the crowd type people, but whatever. the losers. Anyway, so let's finish this up with some more of the hype. That's all this is. I'm sorry if you people think it's something other than just a bunch of hype and propaganda. I mean, anybody who investigates this thing honestly knows the Eddington experiment was really difficult. The results are, somebody's not going to show you some picture and say, see, here's the one plate, the control plate, here's the other plate. Look how obvious it is how they're in the wrong position. It's this, like I said, you have a little fuzzy line, and somehow Eddington's got to figure out not only where this little dot is and the width of that line, but the length of that line, and get all of that shit right to figure out what the actual position of the sun is in that line. You know, not exactly the kind of science that's going to be pristine.
Even if light does not have any mass.
So yeah, which again is just idiotic. I mean, obviously it has something. If it can absorb the force of gravity, it's got to have something called some kind of substance. Nothing else that absorbs the gravity. Okay, you can't make magnetism bend by gravity. You know, isn't that sort of curious, right? These other things that move the speed of light, you can't bend them with gravity. I can't bend gravity with gravity. I can't bend magnetism with gravity, but I can somehow bend a photon. Curious.
So again, his brilliant insight
into converting one of the big forces, the ones affecting big things, the one we should get right, and his brilliant insight into creating a pile of woo to describe the mechanism, just a wooey, the nothing is bent, and then bent nothing causes the stuff somethings to move. I mean, it's on its face just kind of silly. A non-reality is somehow distorted, and the non-reality being distorted somehow makes the real things move funny. It's a horrible explanation, not a brilliant insight.
Into the concept that general theory of relativity bore fruit, and it came up.
So again, the theory of relativity, which has to do with all this time dilation crap, you know, that somehow clocks break, has something to do with photons being bent by gravity, and photons certainly not being able to be shot straight. So if you ever thought there was going to be Star Wars future or something, there's no Star Wars future, because you can never shoot a laser beam straight by relativity rules. So if you want to shoot somebody with a laser beam, yeah, you can't do it, because they're always getting bent by your motion. Wherever you're moving, the fucking beam goes the wrong place. So you're out of luck. You'll never be able to shoot anybody down.
With another secret of the universe, or at least
another secret of the universe, proven by a weak, very, very weak experiment.
He unfolded another secret of the universe so that we had a better understanding of what was going on.
So again, they just establish it as a fact. It's not just a theory anymore. It's like evolution. It's so proven, we don't even need to discuss it. You know, people still discuss evolution. People still challenge evolution. These people accept that, but they won't accept anybody challenging this crap, this horribly evidenced, weakly demonstrated, just nothing, almost absolute nothing is proof. And they'll accept no challenges. But they'll accept, if somebody argues against evolution, they'll say, well, okay, well, you can believe in God if you want. You know, it's okay. But it's not okay to challenge this crap.
So quite brilliant discovery for him, and a fantastic way to prove it.
Yeah, that's right. It's not a fantastic way to prove it, right? So that's an obvious. I mean, the fact that it was a brilliant discovery, now I don't think so. It was a guess. That was it. I mean, he didn't discover it by some sort of rational induction, you know, where he put the pieces together and said, look at all this evidence that points to photons being bent by gravity. He just took a 50-50 on it. Pretty much. And he calls that brilliant insight or something. Like, you have to have a brilliantly creative mind to guess, are photons heavy enough to get bent by gravity, or are they not? Are they material enough? And then you have to have the weirdo guess where you say, well, because the photon thinks it's in the gravity twice as long, it gets affected by twice as much gravity. Where that's just silly. That has no logical continuity. So nothing brilliant in that. And certainly this experiment is not a brilliant way of proving something, because it was almost hopeless from the very beginning.
And he was right once again.
Says you. I mean, says you, propagandist is what I have to say. I mean, do you really think you can maintain integrity to sit there and say, this is good proof? He was proven right. This is what you say is all you need for proof. You would convict people of crimes based on evidence this week. And then you suck. But you're certainly not a scientist, in my opinion. A scientist doesn't fall for that. Scientist doesn't do this propaganda thing. It doesn't take a tiny shred of evidence and turn it into a monstrous, huge pile of evidence with mere words. That's not the scientific method. Exaggerate the fuck out of the facts. Didn't you just exaggerate the fuck out of this story? First, that Einstein proposed it, and then you left out all the details about how this is an incredibly difficult experiment to pull off even under ideal circumstances. Yeah, fuck you. Please donate, like, subscribe, comment, and share. Well, I will as a piece of, but I'll put in the words, this is a horrible piece of propaganda. Propagandist. I'm sorry. It's just propaganda. It's not good science. It's horrible science. It's not fact-based. And the exaggerations throughout this whole video were just unacceptable. All right. So let's see if anybody had anything rational to say now. Look, it's obvious that no single experiment can prove or disprove anything. Who says that? Who the fuck says something that stupid? A single piece of evidence can be completely sufficient. The missing links would be great. If we had 10 missing links in the geological record, well, then the story of evolution's over, isn't it? I mean, we win. It's over. We don't need any more evidence. Fuck the DNA. Fuck everything else. Oh, idiot. I mean, people just say this crap, and it just really pisses me off, because this is another piece of just glib crap. This is an unthoughtful sentence. It's obvious, he says. Okay, that no single experiment can prove or disprove anything. I mean, of course they can. Of course, experiments can prove something. You can prove how much something weighs by putting on a scale. You can prove lots of facts. You can make a statement and prove it with a single experiment. The point is this experiment isn't the kind of thing where you have a great scale and it's very reliable, and it, you step on it, and it doesn't fuck up, and it doesn't break, and it doesn't do any of that shit. I mean, this isn't anything like a good experiment. It's a shitty experiment. In terms of it's weak. It's not a strong experiment because it has too many things that can go wrong. So now he said, first it's obvious, and now it's in fact. So now he's going to tell me facts. So he's telling me what's obvious, and now he's going to tell me what's a fact. Science isn't about proving. Well, I think then you don't understand fuck about it. It's all it is. It's about collecting evidence and then seeing where the evidence points. The evidence, the facts point in directions. Facts point. When you put them together, they make an arrow and it points to another fact. That's how the logic works. So, of course, it's all about proving. Say what you will. Well, yes, I will do that. Thank you for the permission. About popularizers of science. They don't speak for everyone. Well, of course, they speak for science, and that's the part I'm ridiculing, is the scientific community is supposed to be a bunch of people with a devotion to the truth and some sort of sense that that's all that matters is the truth and the facts. And they're not about having fancy haircuts and being stylish and pretty and rubbing each other's testicles and whatnot. No, they're supposed to be about, let's do this fact thing and figure out where we exist in this place and what the fuck's going on. So again, these people are speaking for those people. And if those people, obviously a community, can't stand up and say, you're right, there's way too much fake science going on here. This is all kind of propaganda and bullshit. We're just selling this shit. We're not fucking proving anything. Our experiments suck. And we announce. It's like they recently announced how Einstein proven right. And what was he proven right about? It's because he said something simple like, well, the universe is basically symmetrical and there's no gigantic mega galaxy that sucks everything into it. You know, because they found out that, oh yeah, the force is sort of symmetrical and even, that somehow Einstein's right, because Einstein predicted there's not a big giant boogeyman in the middle of space sucking up all the galaxies. That's something to be right about. I mean, I could have been right about that. I would have guessed there was no boogeyman, you know, gigantic boogeyman in the universe eating all the planets and suns and galaxies. I would have been able to say that too. So I was proven right too by the great experiment. It's that kind of crap science. I mean, that's a crap. It's a crap. It's a nothing experiment. When you discover nothing new, something you totally expected, that's not evidence of anything. Shit, it's the stuff that doesn't fit the model that's the importance details. And, you know, like the fact that none of this gravitational lensing ever shows up in the places we would expect it. The places that are dead dull and have huge amounts of gravity, we don't see any lensing. Isn't it because when space is bent, the root of the photon also bends? It really doesn't matter unless you want to say that that means the photon moves faster than the speed of light, right? Because that's what you're stuck with. At least when they do the clock thing, right? When they do the light clock thing and they have the light go forward and hit the mirror and then go forward to the detector, they're acknowledging that the outside observer sees this longer amount of time. So they're not saying that the light traveled this longer distance in the same amount of time as it took to do this. They're conceding it took longer. So if you're going to concede that the light took longer, or that the light moved more places in the gravity, so it took a longer path, but it took the same amount of time, that's completely inconsistent with the thought experiment. Then your thought experiment isn't matching your other thought experiment. The two thought experiments have inconsistent rules. So that's a violation, I would argue, of continuity or whatever of a theory. You can't change the rules for the thought experiments. So if light can't travel the longer distance, that is, be exposed for a longer period of time, if you don't acknowledge the time. Now, obviously, light doesn't take the longer curved path in more time than it takes to take a straight line path. So it travels the amount of time a straight line would take. It doesn't travel the amount of time a curved line would take. So to argue that because the light thinks it's curving, but it's really not, because we measure the time as a straight line. So you can't have that inconsistency. All right, any theory that replaces relativity. Yeah, okay. So any theory that explains what? Gravity and the fact that motion affects matter, okay, must account for the observed deviations from, got to put spaces in here, friend, a line light takes in a gravitational field. The observed deviation. Where's the observation, you idiot? That's the whole point. Where have you observed this deviation? The argument is the light is observing a time dilation moment and thinks it's in gravity twice as long. There's no other explanation. I'm just saying Einstein's basically arguing that photons aren't affected by gravity by the same inverse square rules. Now, how do you explain that? Anyone who's going to defend relativity, how do you explain why you would give photons an exemption? it's not like it's traveling a little more, okay? So it's not like a curved line versus a straight line. We're talking about twice as much. So we're talking about a line that has to be this plus this and equals this. So somehow this is the path we see the photon take, and this is somehow the real path. The real path is twice as long as this path. You think you have evidence of that? You call that an observed deviation? That hasn't been observed from a line light takes in a gravity field, just like relativity encompasses the observation. So he uses the word observation twice, and the whole point is what fucking observations you're talking about that led Newton to his theory. Just like relativity encompassed the observations that led Newton to his theory. It clearly isn't encompassing Newton. It's rejecting Newton. It's saying the inverse square law doesn't apply to photons. We're going to change the rules for photons. It's a clear change. It's not encompassing. It's violating. It's changing. Idiot. Well, he has the name IP spoofer. So what? You're a faker, a phony, a fraud, a little hider, a little cruddy piece of scum on the internet, a little spammer. What else would an IP spoofer be doing it? That IP spoofing for? Can't they redo this from space? Well, I've suggested that it would be pretty easy to do from space. Yes, incredibly easy to do from space. And they claim their Hubble telescope is too sensitive and it can't go anywhere near the sun because it'll blow up, which is a pile of crap. It has a lid on it. You just put the lid on the side the sun is and you're free. You're done. The sun is not an issue. So it's all bullshit. Bullshit evasions why they can't do the experiment. You would think for it to be a fact, you would need many experiments. Again, you don't even need many. You need the Hubble telescope. Like I said, just take the fucking Hubble telescope, lift its lid this way, the sun's over here, and you can get really close and look at all kinds of things. You can look at stuff right on the edge of the corona and stuff further away and further away and further away. And you'll actually be able to take single pictures, photographs of suns moving, being bent. So it is disappointing that clearly they haven't made it a priority. Let's just put it that way. Regular science physics wants to spend money on LIGO, all kinds of other fancy pantsy weirdo shit. They don't want to spend money on, fixing basic physics, doing the two-slit experiment in a few different ways, and maybe validating this whole bullshit that solar lensing is an observable fact. All right, yeah, science can't take just one experiment. So again, this has nothing to do with one experiment. This has to do with the quality of the experiment. So you people just don't get the point. This is an impossibly difficult experiment, even in perfect conditions. It's marginal. Your results are always going to be subject to error because what you're trying to do is too fine. You're cutting with a razor blade too fine a line. It's like slicing a razor blade in half with a razor blade. It's really hard to do. It's like cutting cat shit with dog shit. I mean, it's not an easy experiment. And the results are not going to be definitive because of the fact that the experiment is just rife with potential error. Catastrophic error. Anyway, let's see. Science can't just take one experiment for sure in this type of a measurement. It's like CERN with their data now. The problem with CERN even goes beyond the fact that we only have one thing that can do the experiment, but clearly the data processing involved, it's all just about data processing and probabilities and analyzing 10 billion results and having an algorithm find your proof and all that kind of shit. So that's flawed for a whole different reason. Catch me inside the matrix. Winky smiley. Why would I find this any? Why would I don't understand people. What is that supposed to mean to somebody rational? Can't mean anything to a rational person. Not possible. All right, so we really don't have an answer so far to the point that why would you take a theory about that's basically about time dilation and bent space? Why do you need to make photons gravitationally affected? And why would you make them exempt from the inverse square law? Science can't take over. We did that. I can give you the mail of a physicist I know if you want to present the contradiction to him and see what he replies. Well, why don't you just send him the link to this video and say, really appreciate it if you could respond to this guy. I mean, put the right time code in, where I started talking about the subject, where I started playing its video. But I suppose, I've already made the argument before, but I can make a video to the physicist. If he's willing to watch a 10-minute video, I'll give him my 10-minute version of what I just said. Einstein is a figurehead idol. They hype so much they don't want to stop. Well, I don't know about this want word. I'm just saying they're obviously invested in Einstein's crap, so you can say that they don't want to, like they're being reluctant, like they'd really like to be free of these silly rules that Einstein created for the universe. They don't seem at all interested in being free, and clearly they seem in taking Einstein even to sillier lengths, just like they did with the gravitational wave thing. They took Einstein's name, plastered it all over this crap, as if Einstein would have endorsed the idea of converting matter into bent space. I mean, their claim is that real. They just basically said that a bunch of mass, that's energy, was not converted into photons, or neutrinos or any kind of energy we know of. It was converted into bent space. It somehow was converted into a change in the geometry of space. So it wasn't converted into force. See, because they can't make gravity a force, right? Because that would be inconsistent with Einstein. So they needed to make the waves bigger than they would be theoretically. And the only way they could make the waves bigger so they could get to us is they had to come up with some way to turn the matter into wave. And the only way you can turn the matter into wave is the wave has to be made out of gravity. So you have to make it out of bent space, essentially. You can't make it out of photons. So how ludicrous is that? Clearly they're invested in this bullshit, and they're taking Einstein and going even wackier. Let's see, I'm afraid he'll get scared from how you look or something like that. Well, then there's no real point. I think text is better. If you don't want, no problem. Yeah, you want to send me his email, fine. Email me his email, and I'll try to write something. But it's just a big hassle to write this shit. Well, Einstein's hair wasn't crazier; it was just dirtier, frankly. So, yeah. I'm a more vain than Einstein. But Einstein didn't have to be, right? Everybody loved him no matter what he did. It just couldn't possibly fail. But it's curious how you know this stuff just doesn't. People just don't care. You, they can show you an area where black holes are suspecting to be moving other suns around them, and you know hunks of galactic gas and all kinds of stuff. So there's mega gravity right there, and yet no lensing. The objects in the background are no way affected. And these contradictions, it doesn't mean anything. you know, gravity's mavity. Yeah. So, you're gonna have to a little more commenting, or I'll have to leave. So I really don't want to. Well, I could bring up other subjects, I suppose. Um, let's see. Um, I mean, I'm working on thinking. I've been thinking about, just because other people are talking about it, the lines of force around conductors, and the fact that there is this curious thing, where depending on which way so I got electricity going through this finger in the forward or the back direction, doesn't really matter. And there's, the compass needles will point all the way around. So in a sense, one side of the conductor, the needle will be north-south, and the other side will be south-north. That's kind of curious. But there's no evidence of it ever moving anywhere. There's no, people keep thinking of it having rotational something, but there's no evidence that there's any rotation in that field at all. But I was thinking about things the way they just have to trip one way or the other. And so you have the idea of like the funnel cloud, or water going down a drain, and how it always swirls in the same direction. And what the trigger for that is, why it's triggered to go one way, or why it's triggered to go the other way. And because in the two, the southern hemisphere does the opposite, indicates that the trigger is the fact that there's a subtle difference between the two forces, one and the other, and that changes the trip. And so I was thinking it probably has something to do with that, why the somehow the fields being the the electrons have to be doing something, okay, that's creating that apparent, like, whatever you want to call it, clockwise motion. So it's like the photon can't be moving just perfectly straight. There has to be some tilt or tip, something that's allowing for the force to end up being emitted radially, from the conductor in that way. So, and it is a weak force. Let's understand, you have to pile a ton of current into wires to get them to move together. So it's not a very strong field, but it exists. And so that's an interesting subject for why the right hand rule. I really haven't gone into that much depth to think about that one specific circumstance. So the other thing was charge, which is completely the same subject, because I did watch the rest of the whatever it is, John Chappell natural philosophy thingy, the Franklin Who guy, and he's really quite, he's quick, and he's he's really very good at thinking and listening. So anyway, he was defending a theory about gravity being a charge phenomenon, and just pointing out the obvious thing that when you take that everything in a way is statically attracted, and you just kind of can't avoid it. There's a name for that plate thing, you know, where you take two neutral things and you move them together and one side goes positive, one side goes negative. Now, in his example, he's deliberately charging something and then exposing something that doesn't have charge to the charge. And the thing that doesn't have charge is obviously going to be, there's going to be an attraction between the two things. Now, you know, he's trying to say that's something like gravity, and I don't think you'll get away with that. So, um, uh, you know, but he's trying to do it by some volume and mass rules that somehow they're the same force, and it just seems like charge doesn't really have a center of gravity. You know, it's charge can be in all kinds of irregular shapes. So it doesn't really, in my opinion, fit for some obvious reasons. But anyway, that's a very related subject, is the nature of that attraction force. You know, because there are plus and minus are different. So, I mean, well, anyway, something to go into. And the whole electron thing, too. You know, because there's circumstances where clearly the electrons are what's being collected. Something charge is very much collecting electrons. It's not just collecting voltage in the sense of the ping pong paddle isn't getting stronger because the electrons are getting closer because you're applying a force pressure. They're getting closer because you're piling on more electrons, and the more electrons are what's creating pressure between the paddles. Yeah. Anyway, but it's an interesting pile of, I mean, they're all kind of related subjects. And, you know, but I haven't, you know, you have to go through it step by step, you know, and try to organize what the nature of everything is in terms of what's well, just like I just pointed out, there's two ways to increase the pressure between two objects if the pressure is made of something bouncing back and forth. You can bring the two objects closer together, and that increases the number of hits, or you can add more ping pong balls and increase. And the fact that there's those two ways, you know, you have to clarify which phenomenon you're observing is being created by one way or being created by the other way. So that's where it gets a little complicated, because you have to be clear about whether you're talking about pressurizing electrons or whether you're talking about increasing the amount of force between the electrons. All right. You sure it's not a conspiracy? Yes, I'm sure it's not a conspiracy. Conspiracies are by nature stupid to even consider, especially since the Inquirer was invented or something. I mean, obviously, conspirers can sell out the other people in the conspiracy. So, you know, unless everybody gets killed, conspiracy just doesn't work as a theory. Even if it's they don't want to seem wrong and have to say it. I think they would all like to be the hero who cleans up physics. Their problem is they know the answer they have is suck, but they can't imagine a better answer. Okay, so they're so clueless that they can't imagine something to fix it. And that was the problem with Einstein's theory. There was no competing theory that seemed rational at all. They didn't have any theory of gravity. Nobody knew. Newton didn't know. Nobody knew what the fuck it was. Because they already threw out the idea of an external pressure, so they ruined the best idea. And so they were just sitting there saying, "What is it? What is it?" Well, you know. And so I'm sure all of these physicists would love to out all the other physicists and say, "You're an idiot. Look, I discovered the truth." But they haven't figured out what the truth is, so they can't do that. You know, they can't say that theory's silly because they don't have anything to replace it with. Yes, the right-hand rule is, like I said, I don't know if I'm going to be able to explain why, it does what it does, but I certainly should explain um, how what it does can be explained by particles. I should do that much anyway. Like the gold plate. I don't know what's like the gold plate, but I guess you mean the way they measure charge, having two pieces of gold plate move away from each other. But that's kind of obviously the opposite effect. Yeah. Yeah, charge is a messy subject. There is a distinct difference between a positive and a negative charge. But there's also this idea of a relative charge. And that's where it gets a little bit complicated. I mean, charge sounds like voltage, and it really isn't. Yeah, that's the problem with charge. Well, it really is, but it isn't. Yeah, I don't know. I didn't say that the right way. Really, it's all about this ground thing. The ground is what really, and so that you can almost make the argument that the Earth is a charge and that everything's relative. But yeah, it still doesn't explain. You can't take something that's 10,000 volts and something that's 12,000 volts and make them attract each other. I have to think about that too. Maybe they're keeping the truth to themselves. No, that's not happening. I mean, honestly, you people are just so useless. So instead of like trying to think of something about physics, you're just thinking about motives and bullshit, and none of this could make any sense. Maybe they're keeping the truth to themselves. I mean, it's just right. Neil deGrasse Tyson and Brian Greene and whatever, Smuckhead, all get together and they all say, "Oh yeah, we're talking shit," and yeah, it doesn't happen because they don't want to risk being weaponized, whatever. I'll continue promoting failed ideas that most people find satisfactory. Well, even the word failed ideas, I don't know if it's the right vernacular, but I don't know if that means anything. I mean, they're theories, and I don't know if you can't call them failed until they've really been outed as failures. They're bad ideas. They're promoting poorly evidenced theory. Okay, and most people can't understand how poor the theory is and how weak the evidence is because they haven't looked at it and nobody's talking about it. Everybody just talks like Eddington proved it, and he didn't. The experiment sucked. It just sucked. Might the right hand rule be from the structure of conductive elements? I know, but then you'd have to say that every single conductor, like even the atmosphere, contains some kind of geometry that obliges this function. And I don't know if that's realistic. I think it has something to do with how electrons move, and that they don't move in a straight line, naturally. They naturally move, unless you aggressively push them, they tend to go all kinds of wobbly. And I think that's what it's a function of. I just haven't figured out exactly how that's the function. Let's see. So they are saying charge is basically causing gravity. Yes. And I mean, I want to try to say it the right way. I mean, they're making some sort of volume. They've made an equation, okay, and so then they're using volume and some sort of polar permutivity or some factor that has to do with how likely it is for your atoms to um, polarize. And when they do the calculation, it comes out to be yes, based on the volume of the Earth and the size of the person. It's a 150-pound human would have this much pull that's exactly the same as 10 meters per second. Blah blah blah. And so they make it sort of sound plausible. Um, but there's all kinds of assumptions in there. Well, not even assumptions, but also some some axioms of how charge works that I don't think are accurate. But how would the Earth put out a constant measure of it in every area of it? Well, the Earth, it's easy because it's spherical. So the sphericalness of the Earth makes it even an easier problem. Wouldn't the force of gravity change in different areas? Different distances from the Earth, yes, but that's the same argument. It's the inverse square law. Now that they haven't demonstrated first that this principle would use the inverse square law, but charge obeys the inverse square law. So in that sense, it fits. Uh, the force of gravity does change in different areas, albeit very slightly. Yeah, well, that's just like saying the Earth is lumpy. Yeah, it's round, but it's lumpy. Yeah, of course. The gravity is subtly different on top of the mountain than it is on the bottom of the ocean. But that kind of you know that's to me not terribly interesting as a fact. I'm just saying the substance of the gravity is in the molten core, which is pretty much all the same stuff mixed up. When you start getting to the harder bits, then you can have bits that are more dense, and lighter bits, and that makes a difference to how much gravity is going to be there. But it's a tiny amount of the total. It's might be measurable, but it's not significant. I should have put a drink here. yeah. There's always so many little things you have to think about. It's little performance art. Uh, so, come on, type more stuff. Lots of subjects I've given you here. You have a theory on space lightning. Yeah, my theory is it's silly. It's absolutely silly. Charge can always be measured. I mean, it's just silly to think that you can't measure it. So I just, that's probably one of the first rules you say it can't be gravity because you can measure charge. So, um, but there's no theory. I mean, there's just absolutely no evidence that the Earth has some huge amount of electrical charge or anything else in the solar system. So, space lightning doesn't seem to be at all plausible. Besides the fact that there's no medium, of course. I mean, plasmas, although they do plasmas in vacuums, plasmas are not in the vacuum. I mean, a plasma is created because the anode and the cathode, I mean, I guess it's the anode, right? Yeah. The anode is losing its atoms. So it's creating a bunch of ions, in bits. And so the voltage is traveling through the matter that's being degraded. So there's actual matter that's being stretched, you could say. You're pulling the matter, and the electricity travels through the matter you've pulled, essentially. So it's not really lightning through a vacuum. So the clear implication being that you just can't transmit electrons across a distance voltage unless you have some the electrons just run out of fuel. They can't they can't make the whole trip. So they need atom bits to hit and to be readmitted. They need to uh, they're like frogs and they need lily pads or something. I don't know how to say that. I mean, but yeah, I mean, you can't propagate a current, um, unless you have a constant source of electrons. No, not in space, but from the Earth to space. Again, what sense does that make? Not in space, but from the Earth to space? What does that even mean? That's called lightning. It has to be a cloud. You're saying lightning without clouds? Yeah, no. Yeah, sorry. I just, you're not asking this question in a form I can understand. Lightning has to be received by something. So even the way you're saying this, Earth to space, you can't shoot something to space. Space it can't collect it. There's no catcher's glove. Space can't collect lightning. So it can't be going to space. It has to go to something else. It's not space. Well, Eric Dullard isn't too bright, but if you have a link, I mean, he's got a ton of weird and wacky videos out there. I've seen a couple, where he's interviewed and stuff, and those aren't too bad. And one 4-hour video where he's supposed to be explaining electricity. But I mean, what's his experiment with, you know, lightning and glass? I mean, what's his insight? Glass is a dielectric in the sense it's an insulator. Essentially, it won't transmit charge well at all, but it will collect charge. So glass is good at collecting charge, but it's really bad at giving it back, or you can't remove it, or see how to put it. But you certainly can remove it. That's the wrong way to say it. But you have to remove it from each little bit of the surface. You can't pull the charge off of glass with a wire or something. You have to pull it off by covering the entire surface with a piece of copper or something and pulling the charge off the surface. So it doesn't. So what would lightning and glass? Why would it be an interesting subject, lightning and glass? I was watching a vid on massive lightning bolts that go up to the higher atmosphere. I doubt that it happens, so it doesn't sound reasonable because there's no matter for the lightning bolts to go to, and there's not enough matter for the lightning to travel through. So I just don't see how that can happen. You need humidity for lightning. Lightning doesn't work too good without humidity. Lightning travels by traveling through ions. It has to make it has to make an electron path before the electricity can flow. So it essentially makes a conductor and then travels through it, travels the force through it. But I mean, it has to make the path before it can travel. If it can't make a path, it can't travel. Aren't there electrical interactions between the Earth and the Sun via the solar wind? Well, no. I mean, the solar wind is ions, so yes, in that sense, they're carrying a charge, um, and the charge effects are felt by the Earth, but it's nothing like lightning, or it's nothing like electricity traveling through a conductor, so to speak. It's like throwing a bunch of it's like putting charge on a bunch of little pieces of glass and then throwing the little pieces of glass at somebody. You didn't really shoot lightning at them. You shot charge at them, charged bits. So yes, it's like throwing batteries at somebody. I don't know what to say. I mean, it's like it's not quite the same thing as throwing lightning, right? It won't let me send a link, but I'll type it in Eric Dollar's lighting and it pops right up. All right. So Eric Dollar lightning. And that works. Just those 3 words work, you say. Okay. And it's supposed to be lightning and glass. Okay. Yeah, I will look later. I mean, I'd play it now, but I'm sure I'm sure, well, yeah, I'm sure, I'm sure it's a waste of time, but, what the hell? I can waste a little bit of time. Let's see. Eric Dollar says glass causes lightning. Well, that's just too fucking insane, frankly.
Into the concept of counter space. We've entered the counter space logic right now. We have 2 spatial conditions. Okay, now if I take and put a piece of glass in between these wires, like I did the iron bar for the magnetism, the glass will absorb up more dielectric lines of force, and the energy storage will be greater.
So he's saying you can store more energy. You can't. So that's crap right there. Pretty much. I mean, obviously, some surfaces are easier to remove charge from than others, but what gets absorbed is always going to be the same thing. All right, so I'll play a little more of it. We'll see. Counter space just sounds like bullshit. Yeah, doesn't it? Anytime somebody says some kind of bullshit word to describe a thing, it's like even the word ether is just so vacuous, because people, when they say ether, they're meaning all kinds of different things. Some people mean grains of sand, and some people mean strings, and some people mean all kinds of stuff that the ether is made out of. So why call it ether when you should just call it something else? It's like calling space bent. It's just stupid. Call it something else. It's obviously, gravity is bent or something. It's not space. Space is nothing.
Now, if I keep turning up the voltage to the point where the glass starts to saturate and can't handle anymore, what happens is, instead of pushing the lines of force out, what the glass will do is start to draw even more lines of force in.
So it's saturated, and yet it's going to pull more in. So right there, you're saying, well, that doesn't logically make any sense. It's just there's 100% humidity, and now the humidity will go up to 110%. I mean, no, I don't think you can do that. I can't disagree on that, which is why I like learning your opinions on things. Well,
the point at which it blasts. That's when you get sparks across power lines, lightning discharges, that type of situation.
That's what's going on. Now let's take a look.
No, what's going on is that the voltage is sufficient, the breakdown voltage is achieved, and that's what causes a spark. But it's always because the atmosphere between the two things is what breaks down. It has nothing to do with the glass.
Lightning discharge is another flux example. Here we got the clouds, we got the earth. Okay, now because we know about these lines of force, we know that there's this volume of space.
Yeah, I mean the glass insulator. So I think so. He's somehow on glass. This it doesn't really sound like he's saying that glass causes lightning. It doesn't sound like he's going there. Like there's glass in the atmosphere. I don't think he's saying the clouds are made out of glass. I don't want to do any search the mystery of all kinds of weird and wacky shit. This isn't the debunk all the other loonies in the world channel. It really isn't. I don't have time to debunk every kook. So please, no, let's not just routinely force me to go debunk a kook.
A brown and thundercloud that is filled with a quantity of electrostatic lines of force, okay, which are basically trying to pull the cloud and the earth together. Okay, now what happens is the cloud evaporates the water, which is holding 50 times at least the amount of lines of force the air can hold, is releasing this electricity and it has nowhere to go. So what happens?
Yeah, so the water's holding the charge. And the nowhere to go argument is the voltage is increasing. So when he says something like it has nowhere to go, the argument is the electrons are getting closer and closer and closer together because they're piling up. So there's more and more electrons. That means their density in the cloud is forcing them to get closer and closer to each other, and that's creating more voltage, pressure. So it wants to get the fuck out of town because the town is pressurized. And all it does is eventually reach a point where it has enough pressure to start ionizing atoms. So it starts ionizing atoms because it has a lot of voltage, a lot of vibrational pressure, and those vibrations spread to the atoms in the atmosphere and little electrons flying off. And so now the voltage has a path. And so now once it reaches a certain point, it has enough of a path, then everything just flows through the hole. So the dam weakens and weakens and weakens in a sense that the dam protrudes. Well, in a sense, the pressure protrudes into the atmosphere, creates ions, and then once you have an alignment of electrons, you can push the voltage through the electrons by just vibrating them, essentially.
What happens is these lines of force start to become tighter and tighter. And what it'll do is it'll start a saturation in some spot.
So again, the lines of force are tighter and tighter. Yes, the charge is getting higher and higher. The voltage is going up like a Venn graph. You're increasing the voltage of the cloud.
There, just like in this piece of glass, when I kept turning the voltage up, it'll start to spark inside and then it'll blast. And so the atoms start to break apart at the point of saturation, and you get a breakdown zone. And what happens is when that saturates in a counterspatial, yes, there's something you want?
Yeah, I want you not to use the word counterspace. This is actually a clip from the video I said, the 4-hour video he did on the history and theory of electricity. Yeah, that's it. So he's wearing the same shirt. It looks like pretty much the same video. I mean, the board doesn't look exactly in the same place, but I think this video is a bit distorted. His head is misshapen and he looks a little spinally challenged. So, but I think it's the same yellow stripe back here. You can't see it, but the same yellow stripe back here. So this is this video, 3 hours and 24 minutes. Yeah, that's what I remember forever. is the same. It's a clip out of this 4-hour video. So I have actually seen this, but I mean, I couldn't watch it in one piece, and I did it a couple of years ago, and it was horrible. I mean, you know, awful. I mean, insane.
Keep it away from that board with a camera. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Once the saturation process starts, all the lines of force will come running into that and discharge the complete 1 cubic volume of electrostatic lines of force in one fire column. Saturation is complete and total.
Now, see, it's not complete and total. So that's the other part that we already know about lightning is it does it in bursts. So when it goes through, it basically burns the conductor up, right? So when it shoots through, is so much voltage going through that the wire evaporates, so to speak. The atmospheric wire it makes disintegrates. And what happens is through that disintegration, there's a bunch of new ion potential. So the matter reforms into new ions, and essentially it kind of uses up all the ions when it goes through. And the stuff is so hot that it recollects into ions again, and then it has another charge. So it keeps lightning shoots more than one burst. It doesn't use up all its gas in the first trip. Lightning wants to be even bigger than it is. You know, it's essentially what I'm saying. And it lasts much longer than you think because it is doing this discharge more than once.
There's nothing jumping from the cloud to ground or any of these types. Those are all myths.
Well, clearly it's a charge emission, and that has a direction positive to negative. So clearly that's happening. So that's just, I don't know how you can deny that there's a distinct polarity to the movement of current. Electricity is the movement of current, even in their plasma experiments. I mean, it moves from anode to cathode, right? I mean, there's no, it's obvious which way when the one side's emitting and the other side's receiving. Clearly, if you Google Kong gravitational force, I don't think I want to do that. There's a whole theory of gravity based on the EM fields of stars and planets. Well, I don't care. I mean, I've already pointed out the electric universe is crap. I'm not here to debunk them. So what the fuck is it? How's it relevant? It's stupid. The theory makes a distinction between mass-dependent gravity and electromagnetic attraction forces. Well, so what? It makes a distinction without explaining how that makes any sense at all. The fact that it really doesn't matter. I can make a hollow piece of glass, and I can put just as much charge on it as I could a solid piece of glass. It just doesn't matter. Clearly, charge is a surface phenomenon. Clearly, gravity is a density phenomenon. It goes right to the core and beyond. I mean, it has to do with how much crap is the line of crap. So if you have a moon here and the Earth over here, all that matters is how long is the diameter of the moon and how long is the diameter of the Earth. And that essentially tells you the gravity potential. How does that have anything to do with charge? Oh, that's right. It has nothing to do with charge. So I just reiterate, I'm not here to debunk every loony in the world. That's not my mission. My mission is to compare my rational theory to their irrational conventional theory based on crappy evidence. I started this video by demonstrating something stated as an absolute fact that has been proven with mush as evidence, just absolute piece of mush. So anyway, come on, comments or I'm leaving. Think of something, type something. You're right, Gary. You could say that. I mean, I could write comments for you. Yes, Gary, I think you're quite correct that science has relied on very poor evidence for way too long. Way too much hype, not enough fact. Yes, Gary, they have jumped the evidence. It's a very good phrase, jumping the evidence. They have jumped the evidence. All right, well, I've provided lots of subjects. You obviously have no input, so your function here is superfluous to my function, I guess. I have to do it all. So the hell with it. I guess I will go find something better to do with my neurons than to engage in potential conversation. All right. LOL. I do appreciate you taking the time to pull the video up. There are so many different theories on the internet. Yes, and it's just as tragic could be, because how do I distinguish myself from all the other kookies? Because I'm not the kook. I'm the one with the right answer. And somehow, how do I make myself understood to be the right answer in a sea of loonies? Even the desperation of their attacks on regular physics, instead of just attacking the fact that the theories are based on very, very undemonstrative experiments, experiments that aren't free of error, free of misconstruing, free of assumptions, free of presumptions. They're experiments just loaded with assumptions and presumptions. Instead of just making those simple arguments, they'll do something like say, Einstein's theory of gravity is a two-body theory and a one-body theory, and it can't be a two-body theory and a one-body theory, and and it's all this little technical crap. And they're doing like some kind of a gotcha thing, and they're doing it with just weak evidence. I mean, it's just kind of a weak argument, to almost pick on semantics, the semantics of an equation. Instead of getting to the heart of an equation, like in a double slit experiment, for example. I mean, that's just so obvious mathematical gimmickry when you think about the fact that this is supposed to be a common phenomenon, single slit, double slit, the same interference pattern, and yet they change a variable fundamental to the equation. They change the variable. So in the single slit, the variable is how wide is the slit. The double slit, it's how wide is the frickin' brick wall. Two fundamentally different things, and they don't explain why those two fundamental things can have the same effect. And I would argue the reason why they have the same effect is about surfaces. It's about how far away surfaces are from each other, not about anything else. And surfaces are a really good subject because I lecture online, guys, also has a series of videos I've been watching on refraction and stuff. And then somebody else did it on prisms. I think the particle guru guy or whatever, the De Hilster father, talking about prisms, and it's all a surface phenomenon. It's just clearly about transitions. So it's not about anything else. I mean, it's always clearly the only thing that makes for these refractions of light is the fact that you have a change in the refractive index, the density of the material, essentially. And it's that, density, or whatever you want to call that refractive index factor of the material. And clearly it's just the transition between the two always that causes the change. So it doesn't matter. The material isn't doing anything. The transition from one kind of atom to another kind of atom, where they're not bound in some kind of way, that's the whole thing. So it's non-bound atoms. So any transition between atoms that aren't bound is really what the subject is. So it's about atoms that aren't stuck together, adhered. I mean, that's just an interesting subject in itself. You know, what makes all of these things is the fact that the atoms want to stay part of the material. You know, they're stuck to each other, the atoms, strong and weak ways, but they're stuck. And the other surface isn't stuck. And that is the barrier that causes refraction. It's that atom to not stuck atom. All right, let me see what else we got here. So if you had a pole that reached to the moon and another person was standing there and you pushed it, wouldn't the person feel it instantly? Yes, it sounds stupid. I'm sure you've heard people explain to you why. First, it's physically impossible. And second, nothing moves faster than the speed of light. So there's no such thing as instantaneously. Obviously, the pole, the pressure moves through all of these material. I hit this side of the pen. It doesn't instantaneously jump over here. The pressure has to move through the pen, and it moves slower than the speed of light. So, you know, I'm sure you've heard that answer. But I've seen videos on this argument, LOL. Yeah, well, Ken Wheeler makes videos, and they're full of shit. He says things like magnetic lines of force are interference pattern. There's no straight lines in nature. Everything's curvilinear. What? You know, people make all kinds of claims. And I say it again, I'm not here to debunk every other lunatic in the universe. Yes, regular science is insanely stupid and silly. They're the ones I have to fight with, but they're the ones in the king chair. I don't need to take somebody and kick him out of his little wooden shack chair. There's no advantage for me to replace my position with some lunatic. I want to replace my position with the king chair. Because I'm right and they're full of shit. And that's the way it should be. I don't want any of the king privileges. I just want the truth to be in the right chair. All right, could you show sometime the double slit experiment with electrons? No, I'm not playing with no electron guns. You know, I mean, it's not a good idea to play with electrons versus the same experiment with photons. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to play with electrons. But they've already done these experiments. I mean, that we don't need to do again. I mean, what needs to be done is changing the materials, doing it in a vacuum. Lots of things need to be done, but that doesn't need to be done. The prison paradigm sounds legit, in my opinion. What does that even mean? I don't even know what that means. No clue. You mean regular physics has an explanation for how prisms work? Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think they have anything close to one. No, I don't mean you should do it. Just show them side by side. Well, I have showed the images, but I guess I could make it even stronger demonstration of how the two patterns look very different, and they really not supposed to, because it's exactly the same math. Except, of course, they've used de Broglie to turn the velocity of the electron into a frequency, which is silly. I understand. I guess I'm saying it would take a certain amount of time for the other person to feel it. It would take a certain amount of time for it to travel through the material. If, let's say, I mean, it has nothing to do, who cares what the person feels? We're talking about whether you can make a push that can go instantaneously, and you can't make a push that goes anywhere instantaneously. If, let's say, it were possible to have a completely solid pole, well, whatever this even means again, in that no amount of distance with no. Well, that makes sense. A solid pole in that amount of distance with no flex. It's just so there's no atoms in the pole. The pole is made out of some sort of solid material, like an electron smashed right next to an electron, right next to an electron, right next to an electron. So you have an imaginary pole that can't possibly exist. Well, part of the problem is you have to get rid of gravity because your pole will collapse on itself from gravity alone. It'll want to go spherical. Okay, so you have to eliminate a lot of other forces that exist besides just the nuclear forces. So you're saying, let's get rid of the nuclear forces. Okay. I have to get rid of gravity. Okay. Now we have this pretend world that I'm supposed to waste my neurons on imagining. So why don't you just put Donald Duck in it and the Three Bears and the Flintstones? Have the Flintstones in the thought experiment too. Because you're so disconnected from reality that why should I give a shit? A shadow can move faster than light. No, it can't. The shadow isn't a thing. It's a projection, like from a movie camera. Okay? It isn't something. The little photons are something. So the little photons that aren't there, that are getting blocked, they're the something. They're getting blocked way over here. They don't go anywhere. See? God, amazing. Ugh. I can't believe it. You just type any kind of shit, won't you? A shadow can move faster than light. Well, it's just like no point, right? A shadow isn't made of photons, obviously. Anyway, I don't know what minus plus dot means, but whatever. Yeah, see, your people are starting to really irritate me. I'm getting furrowed brow and such. They're just too fucking stupid. And you just keep going to the same crap. Let's talk about flat Earth. Let's talk about upside down pineapple chocolate cake. You're fucking all Homer Simpson retards. It's a video I watched too. Well, that doesn't mean anything. I don't really want to have to show it you. I really don't even want to have to explain to you how this process doesn't mean anything. I can, this moving a laser beam. I can move a laser beam on the surface of the moon faster than the speed of light just by going like this. I can do it because you see, this has an arc. Okay, and so I'm only moving it a centimeter, but on the moon, I'm moving it hundreds and thousands of miles. But I'm not moving anything. The only thing moving is the photons, retard. And only a tiny percentage of the photons actually go the distance. So this has nothing to do with anything moving. There's no thing moving. No photon goes like this across the surface of the Earth. They're all just individual photons going from Earth to the moon, Earth to the moon, Earth to the moon. Each one of them made the same length trip, essentially. I mean, a little bit different for this one than from this middle one, but the same length trip, each photon. No bullshit. Oh, God, I just hate you people. Oh, you're all addicted to silly shit. I mean, this is why they can get away with it. This is why physics is so full of crap. It's because you love boring yourself into assholes, and looking around inside of colons. That's your favorite place to go, is Stupidville. Retardium. Let's imagine all kinds of silly crap. Because thinking about reality is too difficult. So anyway, depressing. So I guess I'll just give up. Because, I asked for participation. The participation is shit. So, till next time and such. I'm gonna have to bore my way through more fucking shit. Shit.